I accidentally joined a cults group chat. I don't know if I'll make it out alive. The title explains it all. I'll explain everything to the best of my abilities. I'm not sure I'll make it, so I'm posting this story as a cautionary tale to others to hopefully prevent future deaths. It was in the middle of the night. I was in a voice chat with 4 of my friends. Since I was going to be home alone for the next week, I could stay up and have fun without any issues. Around 4 a.m., we had run out of things to talk about, so there was an uncomfortable silence for the next few minutes. I was just looking around my room when suddenly my phone turned on with a bright flash. I had gotten a notification telling me I had joined some random group I never heard about. After some initial confusion, I opened the app and saw that the one who invited me was one of the friends in the voice chat with me. I asked him why he did that, and he just said he was bored and thought it would be fun for us to raid some random group chats. We thought about it and decided to try it out. We invited the other 2 friends and all checked out the group. There were over 1,000 members, and right up until we joined, there was a conversation going on. They were talking about random stuff. The best way I could describe it was like a Facebook group full of middle-aged mums talking about boring stuff. There were a number of topics: the best detergent to remove carpet stains, auctions for phone cases and chargers, and a bunch of other usual stuff. There was nothing unusual going on, so we decided it was the perfect time to start. As teenagers, we began doing a number of weird stuff, from sending porn links to those dumb speed up your PC tutorials. After a while of doing random shit to annoy the members, there was still nothing. The friend that joined first said right as he joined he saw that people were still typing, but after that it all stopped. We saw that our attempt at a raid had failed, as we weren't getting any angry messages or anything along those lines. As we were about to call it quits, the friend that was the first to join gasped in excitement. He has gotten a private message from the owner of the group. We all got really excited and told him to start sharing his screen so we could watch along. He got a message from the owner that boiled down to a welcoming to the group. The owner saw all our messages and asked what our intentions were. My friend then started role-playing as a grandmother in her late 80s. We all had a good laugh from it, when suddenly, within seconds of the last message he sent, the owner replied back with a screenshot. It was a screenshot taken from Google Maps. It was the front of his house. Although my friend was quiet as soon as he saw it, the rest of us started laughing our asses off. We reassured him it was Google Maps, so he wasn't there, obviously. Then, another message from the owner 10 seconds later. Parker Williams, 14 years old. Brian Sanders, 15 years old. William Aston, 14 years old. Adam Smith, 14 years old. He was reading all our private information back to us. At this point, nobody was laughing. Even though we knew we got doxed, we still thought he wasn't going to do anything else. For the next minute, it was pure silence. All 3 of my friends went to check if their doors were locked, while I kept looking through the group messages. After 5 minutes, there was finally another message from some random person in the group. It was another screenshot from Google Maps. This time, it was my house, then another one of William's house, then Brian's house. I got another notification on my phone. The owner sent me a private message next. It was a 39-second video. The footage was really blurry, and the camera was shaking. Most of the sound was heavy breathing until the last 9 seconds. The camera zoomed in, and although blurry, I saw Parker. The owner was outside his house. I yelled at Parker, but no response. Brian and William came back, but not Parker. The group chat started getting flooded with messages like, "Parker has left." There were so many I was convinced they were chatbots. I had gotten another picture from the owner. This one was really high quality, but the room was dark. The only light was from a computer monitor. In the corner I saw something. It was on the ground with some sort of liquid next to it. Then another picture closer to the thing on the ground. Then another, and another. Eventually I could tell it was Parker. This wasn't a joke anymore. The group chat started getting spammed with pictures of mutilated bodies and gore. Then more pictures depicting satanic rituals. All our face cams got turned on by themselves. In the background of Brian's room, I saw something moving. I asked him what it was, but he said he didn't see anything and yelled at me to not make stupid jokes at a time like this. Before I could even say a word, I realized that behind him was a window. It was being opened by someone outside. I yelled at him to run, but by the time he realized what was going on, it was too late. He got pulled away into the darkness. For the next 3 minutes, we still heard faint screaming. It was only me and William left. I had enough and went to call for help. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. After a few seconds, someone finally picked up. 911, what's your emergency? Please help. Someone is breaking into my house. The sound of someone banging on my door startled me. It kept getting louder and louder. Then the sound of shattering glass sent chills down my spine. I hid under my bed and tried to calm my breathing. Stay calm, sir. We need your address. I couldn't reply because I heard footsteps getting closer. Newcastle Street, Panama City, 8698. Please help. Help is on the way, sir. Where are you right now? I'm hiding under my bed. I may not be able to respond if he gets too close. For a moment, there was pure silence. No sounds at all. Then a brief and quiet sound of laughter. It got louder and louder. It was all coming from my phone. Soon enough, I could hear the same laugh coming from downstairs. I snuck my way to the closet. I hid inside there. As I'm writing this, I hear him getting closer. He went from room to room. He is almost here. I used to live in a cult that silenced women. Physically, literally. The women in that cult had their vocal cords cut with a special ceremony when they were 12. We lived in a remote community up in northern British Columbia. It is a healthy, thriving community with orchards and mines, electricity, and a small clinic, and even a tattoo parlor. The teachers and doctors had internet. It was beautiful and very peaceful. Everybody was well looked after, with plenty of wonderful food and an outdoorsy lifestyle. In fact, I later learned that outsiders often make applications to join the community, women even, with their children. Sometimes the applications were successful. Not me, though. I had been desperate to get out ever since the day I was 10, and my dad told me about the silencing. Dad was a teacher. I had wanted to become a teacher, like my dad. I had grown up watching him prepare lesson plans, grade assignments with his thick, chunky red pens, discussing course content and pedagogy with his colleagues loudly and passionately. I was enthralled by it all, and knew, as indeed my dad often said, there was nothing more noble and worthwhile than teaching and shaping the mind of the young. No wonder only men in our community were entrusted to be teachers. How ridiculous and backwards was the outside world with their female teachers and unsilenced women, always mired in instability and chaos. No wonder the outside was full of war, violence, debt, and poverty. Their women always under the threat of assault. The teachers played us videos with current dates, clips from the news made by outsiders themselves, showing how they treat their women. No wonder there was always a queue of women desperate to join us, a community free of mistreatment, abuse, and assault, with plenty food for everyone and a small safe home. Being silenced must be a small price to pay. I remembered my mom laughing until the tears ran down her face when I had first told her about wanting to become like teacher, just like Daddy. Then she had gathered me in her arms and sobbed as if her heart had broken. Dad told about the silencing a short while after that. He was a great teacher, and I understood why it was necessary. Dad had explained it all carefully. The history, the benefits to community, the evolution from a symbolic tattoo along the throat to an actual painless clinical procedure which disabled the vocal cords permanently. I was so lucky I had a teacher dad who took the time to explain things so beautifully and clearly to me. Other girls would usually just get a notice from the clinic with the date and time of their silencing appointment. However, as Dad said, it was very important that it was taught correctly, with proper context. Otherwise, it wouldn't be understood properly. That's why teaching was such an important job. Having a teacher dad had other benefits too. He had thrown me a silencing party most girls could only dream of, with amazing food imported from outside, dancing and singing. I had a gorgeous, floofy, glittery, lacy dress, also bought specially from outside for the occasion, and all my friends had been so jealous as I shimmered through the day. I still remember that dress, but then it was over, and everyone went home. My silencing would take place tomorrow. I lay in the dark, unable to ignore the knot of fear that had been tightening in me all day. Well, all my life, really, since the day Dad told me about the silencing. As I lay there, thinking about the procedure tomorrow, which would permanently disable my vocal cords and silence me forever, the waves of fear breaking over me grew stronger. There was a light tap at my bedroom door. I raised my head and called softly, "Yes?" The door opened, and my mum glided quietly in. She was also dressed for bed, and despite the dark, the tattoo along her neck and throat was plainly visible. She had just chosen a plain line, as I would. Many silence women choose elaborate designs for the neck tattoo they received after their silencing, but I wanted the same plain line across my neck as Mom had. She reached out for my hand. I whispered, "Mom, I'm scared." She started typing on her pad, which was always with her. "Please don't be scared, Eliza. It's over so soon, and it doesn't hurt one bit, just the tattoo afterwards, a little bit." I read the glowing words. Then I said, "Mom, I don't want to. I don't want to lose my voice." She looked so sad as she typed furiously. "Eliza, your dad has explained why it's like this here. You've studied examples of societies which don't have silencing. You know how terrible and miserable they are. We are such a peaceful, orderly society since we started silencing women. You know that," Dad yelled loudly. "Louisa, are you coming to bed?" Mom bent down for one last hurried kiss, and then left my room. I was alone with my fears again. I couldn't help thinking about the outside, where women jabbered, chattered, gossiped, wheedled, manipulated men and told stories and yammered and protested and wanted this and that and the other. Dad said it was a disgrace, and one day, maybe they would see the error of their ways and become like our community. But all these thoughts couldn't stop my fear for tomorrow and my silencing. Dark hours passed as I stared at the ceiling. I still remember those hours, heavy like glue, silent. It must have been 2 a.m. when I heard a faint tap-tap at my window. I sat up, putting aside my childish fears, and opened the curtain. An adult woman was behind the glass, smiling at me. Her neck tattoo was clearly visible in the moonlight, a beautiful design of roses and thorns. I didn't care about safety. My dread for tomorrow had desensitized me. I threw open the window. "Who are you?" The woman opened her mouth and spoke, quietly, but still spoke, her voice coming from her lips. "Hello, Eliza. Will you come away with me?" I had never seen a woman of that age with a neck tattoo who could talk. My jaw dropped. What? She started speaking rapidly. Eliza, I know how you feel. We can take you away outside. I can't explain much now, but if you want to, you have to come away with me now. It will be a hard life, but you won't lose your voice. At least not today you won't. I was silent for a bit. I felt the dreadful fear of the last few years shifting a bit, giving way to a new emotion. Hope. Excitement. I looked at the aged face of this talking woman with the tattooed roses on her throat and nodded dumbly. She smiled at me. Excellent. Follow me. No, you don't need anything. We have everything you will need. A car is waiting. Not even shoes. Just move fast. My heart beating fast, I followed my new friend and climbed out of the window. She drove me for hours through the mountains, through winding back roads I never knew existed. She told me how my mom had sent them a forbidden message to come get me. I knew I would never see my mom and dad again. Sometimes little bits of news filter through connections. The community thrives. Life outside is hard. But I can speak. My girlfriend and I were chased by a satanic cult in the Appalachia Mountains of West Virginia. This happened in the summer of 2017. My girlfriend and I are from St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. We both attended university there and decided to take a road trip through the United States to celebrate our graduation. Our destination was Miami, Florida. Her family owns a condo near the beach, so we had a free place to stay. We decided to drive instead of fly because we wanted to see a bit of the country on the way down and visit a few friends. The trip usually takes about 20 to 24 hours by car non-stop, and we were planning on making multiple stops. The first part of the road trip was a wonderful experience. We went shopping in Buffalo, then made our way down to Pittsburgh and managed to catch a Pirates game. However, once we hit West Virginia, things changed. It was nothing but endless wilderness and a few small towns sprinkled in between. We had plans to meet up with some friends for dinner in Charlotte, North Carolina, so we wanted to get through West Virginia ASAP. We only made stops when we absolutely had to. We ended up stopping for gas at a pretty remote spot. My girlfriend and I got out of the car. I started pumping gas, and she went inside to use the washroom and pick up some snacks. My tank was about half full when I heard a voice behind me ask, "You're lost?" I looked behind me and I saw a middle-aged white man with long, messy brown hair that reached down to his shoulders and an unkempt beard with dashes of grays and what looked to be drops of dried-up mucus. His clothes were torn up and dirty, and he smelled like a mixture of beer, sweat, pee, and feces. He was a little overweight, but pretty tall. I'm 6 feet, and he was about 4 inches taller than me. The teeth he still had left were a yellowish brown. On his right cheek, just under his eye, was a tattoo of some kind of pentagram. I'm pretty into YouTube videos about true crime and cults, so I was able to recognize what it was pretty quickly. He was standing very close to my face, to the point where the smell of his breath was making me dizzy, so I backed up. "No, sir, just passing through," I said nervously. "Not too often we see tourists passing through these parts," he responded. "Where you headed?" As he said this, he moved even closer than he was before. I had my back up against my car, and I couldn't move back any further. I wanted to get away from this guy as quickly as possible, but the car was still filling up with gas, and my girlfriend was still inside the gas station. I didn't want this dude to know where we were really going, so I told him I was visiting family in Kentucky, and they were expecting us. After I said this, he cracked a weird half smile, opening his mouth just wide enough for me to get a look at his teeth again. I'll never forget that face. His bloodshot eyes were staring deep into my soul. He let out a weird and sinister laugh. "How lovely," he said. "I'll see you kids around." Then he walked away. I was very relieved that he walked away, but also terrified by his last remarks. I didn't even see him when we pulled up to the gas station, so how did he know I wasn't alone? I figured he must have been watching my girlfriend and I when we arrived. The car was finally filled up, and I saw my girlfriend walking toward the car with bags full of snacks for the road. I noticed the weird guy was still at the gas station. He was a few pumps away from us, leaning up against an old red pickup truck. But to my utter discomfort, he wasn't alone. There were 2 other men and 1 woman with him, making the group 4 in total. The 2 men were just as big as he was, but they had shaved heads. One of them was wearing a dirty white tank top, and the other had no shirt on at all. The woman was shorter, about 5 feet 5 inches. She was very skinny, with heavy bags under her eyes and long blonde hair. They all looked like they had been living in the woods for the past 10 years. They were staring and pointing at us, talking amongst themselves. As soon as my girlfriend got to the car, I urgently told her to get in. I'm usually a pretty calm guy, so when my girlfriend noticed I was kind of freaking out, she knew something was up. We quickly entered the car, I locked the doors, and I began hauling ass out of the gas station. As we pulled around their red truck to the exit, I noticed there was another pentagram painted on the hood. I also noticed the skull of a goat or ram on their windshield. The 4 people began getting into their truck as they saw us leaving. I knew they were going to follow us as soon as we left. I explained the situation to my girlfriend as we were speeding away from the gas station. We were zooming down the road, and I looked in my rearview mirror. As I expected, the red truck was right behind us. I sped up even more, and they did too. I made a left, they did too. I made a full U-turn, and they did as well. My girlfriend managed to get reception and dialed 911. We gave the operator our location, and they gave us directions to the nearest police station. The operator also asked for the license plate, but the truck didn't have any. Once we were off the phone with them, my girlfriend stuck her cell phone outside of the window and started pointing to it, letting the creeps know we called the police. They finally got the message and stopped following us. We arrived to the police station and filed a report. We gave them the description of the truck and suspects. The investigator said they would call us if they had any more information. We were extremely shaken, but also relieved. All we wanted to do at that point was get the hell out of West Virginia. We thought we had shaken the group for good, but unfortunately, we were wrong. We decided to drive through the night to cover as much ground as possible. The area of Appalachia we were in had no streetlights, and I could only see what my headlights allowed me to see. Everything was fine until I noticed 2 headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but I kept an eye on them. The headlights got closer and closer until they were tailgating us. To my complete shock and horror, it was the same red truck from the gas station. These people had somehow found us again and were right behind us. "It's them!" I yelled. My girlfriend began to freak out and dialed 911. I floored the gas pedal, not even knowing what was 10 meters in front of me. All we cared about was escaping. We got a mile up the road until my girlfriend yelled, "Watch out!" There were 3 dead cows blocking the narrow road. I slammed on the brakes. The red truck was right behind us, and we couldn't go forward. We knew we fell into a trap. All of a sudden, a naked man wearing a goat mask darted from out of the woods and began hitting our car with what looked like a large axe. The naked man got on the hood of our car and started making sheep noises. My girlfriend was still on the phone with 911, but all she could do was scream. The people behind us got out of the red truck and began walking toward our car. 2 of them had rifles, and one of them had a large machete. I knew what I had to do. I put the car into reverse and floored it. The naked man fell off our car. We smashed into the truck, and I managed to knock it into a ditch. After the truck was out of the way, I pulled the fastest U-turn of my life, and we got out of there. The people were yelling all kinds of obscenities at us as we drove away. I drove as fast as I could away from these people until we finally arrived in a town and filed another police report. My girlfriend and I were uninjured, thankfully, but we were extremely traumatized. The car was still drivable after that, so we were able to get the fuck out of West Virginia the next morning. This entire experience made my girlfriend and I scared to do any more road trips. I still call the local police department in West Virginia once in a while to see if they have any leads on these people, but so far they have not found anything. The fact that these people were able to find us after we went to the police station and drove far away still scares and baffles me to this day. Who knows what kind of sick and twisted things this cult had planned if they managed to catch us. Stay safe out there, everyone. There is a cult obsessed with my girlfriend. This all started a few weeks ago. I will give a little background first. I met my girlfriend just after college, and we have been together for a little over 7 years. We currently live in a 2-bedroom cottage in our hometown. It is very rural where we live, and it takes around an hour to get into the city. We both work in the city, but I work a couple of days a week from home. The company my girlfriend works for is a non-profit, charitable organization. She works in the social media department, and their main ethos is to encourage positive change. The videos they promote are usually quite uplifting videos. They share a lot of them, but also create their own. This means that she will occasionally appear in the videos if they are interviewing someone or acting something out. A few weeks ago, she told me to check out one of the videos where she had interviewed someone. I watched the video and then decided to read some of the comments. I am not a very jealous person, but I kind of wanted to know what people were saying, specifically about her. The comments were pretty mundane at first. The usual fight the power type responses. I became a bit obsessed and kept scrolling through. There was the occasional misogynist comment, but nothing I did not expect. That was until I found a few comments that unsettled me. The original comment had around 10 likes and had tagged a number of other accounts. The message said, "We cannot wait for you to join us. You are perfect." I clicked on the replies, and the accounts that had been tagged had all replied. The messages ranged from stating that she was the perfect match for their group to openly discussing what type of underwear they thought she was wearing. This was discussed in quite some detail. I figured it was just a bunch of desperate guys, until I read another reply. It said how he had watched her eating her lunch in the park yesterday. He wanted to go up to her and introduce himself, but knew that was not part of the rules. He described in detail what she was wearing. It was exactly what she wore yesterday. I contacted my girlfriend to tell her about this and advised her to delete the comments and contact the admins of the site. I looked through previous videos and saw that these comments were frequent on videos she appeared in. They were always the same and always mentioned her joining them and how she was exactly what they wanted. They were all throwaway accounts, with the only friends being the people that were tagged in the comments. The accounts were reported to the site admins, and we heard nothing more of it for a couple of weeks. That was until late last week. I received a phone call from my girlfriend while I was working from home. Well, that was unexpected, but how did you get them to agree to putting that? She said, in a giddy tone. Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean. Is everything okay? I said, confused. The flowers. Silly. I love them. The note was a bit naughty, though. What if my colleague saw that? She said, chuckling down the phone. What do you mean? I did not send flowers. But who did then? What did the note say? Maybe they are from your mum. No. She paused, then continued. The note said, "Roses are red, violets are blue. I am using my hand, but thinking of you." What the hell? What? Call the police, that is disgusting, I said, standing up, almost throwing my phone across the room. I drove up to her office later that evening to pick her up, rather than her getting the train. I was terrified at the thought of someone following her once she left the office. The police took the letter in as evidence. They also looked through the comments to see if they could trace the comments back to the people behind the accounts. The flowers had not been sent through a company or courier service, which means that one of these men must have hand-delivered them to the front desk. We were both shaken up on the way home and barely spoke about the incident. Her boss told her to work from home for the rest of the week until everything calmed down. We did not hear anything after that for a few days, and her boss told us that nothing else had arrived at the office. We went to see family this weekend to try and take our minds off things. We arrived back home a few hours ago, and something immediately felt off. The house itself seemed untouched, but the back garden gate was left wide open. I entered the house cautiously and searched the whole house, but found nothing. I went to the back of the cottage and noticed some marks on the back window. It looked as if someone had been clasping their hands together to look inside. We debated calling the police, but was tired and could not prove anything. We also live quite far away from the nearest police station, so it would take them a while to get here. We closed all of the curtains and made sure the place was locked up and headed to bed. I kept the phone next to me on speed dial just in case, and had my trusty bat at the side of the bed. I could not sleep much, so decided to head into the living room and watch some television. I was about to call it a night when I heard some commotion coming from the front of the cottage. I hesitantly walked over to the window and pulled back the curtains slightly. It was dark, but I could make out a number of hooded figures standing around 15 feet from the house. They were swaying in sync with each other and chanting something unintelligible. I opened the curtains a little more to get a better look, and as I did, the figures stopped chanting and stared directly at me. In the brief moment that I looked over at them, I saw their faces. They were men, but their faces were void of any emotion at all. They were completely blank as they stared at me, as if staring through me. I quickly pulled the curtains back in pure terror and stumbled across the hallway back into the bedroom. I grabbed the phone, waking my girlfriend up in all of the commotion. She groggily awoke, asking me what was wrong. I told her I would explain in a minute and called the police. I began speaking to the operator when the chanting began to start up once again. I turned away for a brief moment to grab my bat when I noticed the chanting had stopped. I turned around to see my girlfriend peering outside the window. She was completely motionless as I shouted at her to get away from the window. She turned to me, her eyes wide, her face pale in fear. She wanted to scream, but could not formulate a response. I walked over to her and pulled her towards me. She pushed me away slightly and motioned at me to look. The operator asked me to explain what was happening and to stay on the line, but I could not speak. I looked outside of the window at the men, who were now perched on their knees. They were performing some kind of prayer or ritual. They were making strange hand gestures in an almost dance-like fashion. They were no longer in sync with each other and were all creating different symbols with their hands. The men gradually got back to their feet and huddled in a circular formation. They broke apart, and one of the men appeared from the center of the circle, holding a large, plain white box. He held it above his head before placing it gently in front of the cottage. They performed one final chant before turning around and slowly fading off into the distance. We are sitting here waiting for the police to arrive. I would leave, but I am terrified They are still out there. They should be here soon. I have no idea who these people are. I have no idea how they found out where we live, and I have no idea what is in that box. I am not sure I want to know. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. Every creak, every gust of wind unnerved us. I wanted to pack up and leave, but my girlfriend was against the idea. We waited a little while longer, and eventually heard sirens in the distance. I immediately breathed a sigh of relief. There was a knock at the door soon after. The relief I felt quickly turned to paranoia in my tired state. I was still afraid that these people could be anyone. They could be our neighbors down the street, or the very police officers asking us to answer the door. I peeked through the peephole, and seeing the police officers' sullen faces somehow put me at ease. I worked up the courage to open the front door, and the two police officers introduced themselves as Officers Jenkins and Henderson. I immediately began to blurt out some incoherent word vomit. I sounded insane, talking about a group of men chanting and praying outside of our house. They eventually managed to calm me down, and I began to explain the situation clearer. They were perplexed by what I was saying and looked at me as if I were mad. They entered the house and saw my girlfriend on the bed, shaking nervously. Jenkins directed me towards the living room, while Henderson calmly began to speak with my girlfriend. I sat there in silence for a little while, before Henderson returned from the bedroom. He whispered something to Jenkins before he spoke to me. He told me that my girlfriend had confirmed my story. I did not like the way he sarcastically sounded out the word story when he said it. It was as if he were mocking me. The two police officers sat at the dining table and asked me to start from the beginning. I explained absolutely everything to them in as much detail as I could. It was dark outside when we saw the men, however, so I did not have much of a description to give them. I could make out basic features, but not enough to give a vivid description. I could not even remember how many of them there were. I told the officers that the men had left a box outside, and Henderson motioned to Jenkins to check it out. He re-entered the house a little while later, slightly out of breath and a little bit more frantic than before. You need to see this," he said in a cracked voice. "Okay, I will be right back. Stay inside," Henderson said to me in an assertive manner. Officer Jenkins glanced me a worried look as they exited the room. I sat there momentarily before curiosity got the better of me. I told my girlfriend I would be right back and headed outside. She had calmed down a little at this point and was on the phone with her mother. There was an unpleasant smell in the air as I exited the house. It got stronger and more gag-inducing as I got closer to the box. The box was around 3 to 4 feet in length and quite shallow. The lid had been removed, and the two officers were standing next to the police car in the driveway. Jenkins was pacing next to the car, while Henderson was calling in for backup. I focused my attention back towards the box and walked closer to look inside. I stumbled back initially, as I thought there was a person inside of the box. Inside of the box was what looked like a handmade doll of some kind. It had a head, but no features on its face. It was crudely made, with one long arm at the side, and the head was coming apart from the neck. It was dressed in a white, disheveled wedding dress and surrounded by dark, decaying flowers that filled the remainder of the box. The dress itself had been slashed around the chest area, cutting through the stuffing of the doll, creating a large hole. The surrounding chest area of the dress was covered in what I can only assume was blood splatter. Carefully placed inside of the hole was a heart. It was almost certainly an animal's heart, but it immediately made me gag. I jumped as I heard Henderson shout over to me. He frantically ushered me back inside of the house and told me to wait inside and lock the doors while they searched the area. He was much more serious this time. I locked the front door as he requested and sat next to my girlfriend in the bedroom. She asked me if everything was okay, and I replied that it was. I did not mention the box, as there was no need to worry her any more than she already was. A couple more police cars arrived shortly after that, and we were told to remain in the house for the time being. We stayed inside for a little while, before being asked if we had anywhere else we could stay for a few days. I was more than happy to get out of that house for a little while, and one of the police cars escorted us to my parents' house, which is a 15-minute drive. We arrived at my parents' house around 4 p.m. UK time. We had not slept for over 24 hours and were pretty out of it when we arrived. After briefly explaining the events to my parents, we locked ourselves in one of the bedrooms and tried to get some sleep. I must have passed out shortly after, because when I woke, the sun was rising through the darkness. There was a soft knocking coming from the bedroom door. I was alarmed at first, until I heard my father's voice. He told me that the police were here to ask a few questions and asked if I felt up to it. I gently closed the door to not wake my girlfriend and headed downstairs. The two police officers from before were standing at the foot of the stairs and asked to speak to me in private. "We apologize for bothering you so early. We conducted a search of the area and we need to ask you some questions," Henderson said, in a much more official capacity than before. "Okay, what's happening?" I quickly rebutted. "We need to show you some photographs. Can you identify anyone that looks familiar?" Henderson said. He opened a small plastic folder and removed an array of photos. They were all pictures of women. They looked like stock photos that were pulled from the internet. The photos were professional grade quality, and the women were all dressed in either evening gowns or wedding dresses. I gulped as I scanned my eyes over the women's faces. Their faces were contorted into a fearful gaze. They looked tired and beat up as they stared ahead. The majority of the women were hunched over and had bruising on the parts of skin that could be seen. "What is this?" I said, as I raised my head, disturbed at the images. He glanced at his partner for a moment before turning back to me. "We conducted a search of the area last night. In the early hours, we searched the barn, in the field behind your house. Inside of the barn, there seemed to have been what I can only describe at the moment as religious activity. These photos were found among others. We are attempting to identify the women in these photos at present." "Religious activity?" I said. He once again glanced at his partner before taking a deep breath and exhaling. "We cannot divulge any more information at this point. We will need you and your girlfriend to come down to the station to make an official statement when you feel up to it. We will contact you if we need anything more from you. We have police cars patrolling the area just in case." They got up to leave before Henderson turned back towards me. "I should not be saying this. We found pictures of you and your girlfriend dating back to last year. The photos were taken from a distance, and it seems that these people had been watching you for a little while before making contact. None of this was hidden, so I assume they did not care if the barn was found. I strongly suggest you remain here for the time being and do not return to the house." I nodded back to him, as it was the only response I could muster. I sat there in silence after they left, trying to wrap my head around the whole situation. If they had been watching us for months, why had they not made their move sooner? They would have had countless opportunities in the past, where my girlfriend was alone in the cottage. She would also go for lone, early morning runs through the field. Were the women in the pictures once in similar situations? I also have no idea what that doll means. I have a million questions, but no answers. If anyone can enlighten me on any of this, I would appreciate any help I can get. We're going to stay at my parents' for the time being, as it is in a more residential area. It is a detached house, but the neighbors are all a stone's throw away. We have both taken some time off of work, and I will update if there are any more developments. Part 3. These people do not seem to be going away anytime soon. We have been moved to an undisclosed, secure location. We have been told to not disclose our location to anyone, nor make direct contact with anyone back home. I have not told them I am writing up my accounts of what is happening. They would not allow this. At this point, though, I feel this is beyond the comprehension of the local police. I cannot imagine they have dealt with anything like this before. It had all calmed down over the past few days, and it felt as if the storm had finally settled. In that short time, it was as if everything had returned to some semblance of normality. I knew, though, in the back of my mind, that it was not over. The only time we had left the house was to write up an official report at the police station. There had been no new developments in the case, as far as we were aware, and no sightings of these people. That was until yesterday evening, when the sirens in the distance brought us back to reality. I hoped that they would pass us by, but as the sirens drew closer, I knew it was for us. I opened the front door to 3 police cars pulling up to the house. A police officer exited one of the cars and jogged up to the front door. "Sir, we need you and your family to pack a bag immediately. We need to leave as soon as possible," he said abruptly. What's going on? Has something happened?" I said. "Sir, I need you all to pack a bag immediately and come with us," he said in a hurried tone. We all packed up a bag each and headed off into the unknown. The sincerity in the police officer's tone had made me blindly follow orders. I consistently asked questions on the way, but received no response. We sat there in silence for most of the trip, and after an hour of driving, we arrived at a house. We entered the house and were greeted by 2 plain-clothed police officers. We emotionlessly walked around the house as they gave us a brief tour. They then directed us to the living room and asked us to take a seat. We all sat down in the living room in silence until one of the officers spoke. "There have been some developments in the case. There will be an official report given soon. We needed to move you and your family as soon as possible, as we believe there is a serious threat to your safety," he said, before briefly pausing. I think he was expecting some kind of response, but none of us spoke a word. The officer continued. "We received reports this evening concerning a group of people congregating outside of your house. Police officers were dispatched to the scene, but when they arrived, the people had already left. The front windows to the house had all been broken, and the front door was off of its hinges. The police officers entered the house at around 8 p.m. and searched the property. They entered the bedroom." He cleared his throat and wiped his brow before continuing. "They entered the bedroom of the property and found a female tied to the bed. She was spread across the bed and was pronounced dead on arrival." He cleared his throat once again and shot a worried look to his partner. His partner nodded to him, and the officer continued. "The woman had been mutilated, and her blood was strewn across the wall to create a message. We had to move you immediately, as we feel you are in imminent danger from these people. The message said, 'Not right for him, you will be.' There was also a number carved into the woman's chest. It was the number 21. Does this mean anything to any of you?" I thought about it, but could not come up with anything at all. That is not our age, nor is it either of our birthdays. I mentioned that it may be the amount of victims, but the officers did not seem to agree. We all sat there, staring off into the distance, before my girlfriend began to cry uncontrollably. I attempted to console her with my mother, but it was not much use. That could have been her laid out across that bed. That still could be. These people seem resilient, and we cannot hide forever. Seeing her in this state, my fear quickly turned to rage. I shouted at the police officers, "What is the next course of action? What the hell are we supposed to do? You will need to remain here for the time being. We will be posted inside the house and a police car will be outside. We will find these people," the officer said, turning to face me. The police officers exited the room on that note and gave us some time alone. We must have sat there for an hour in silence before we finally decided to head off to sleep. The police being inside and outside of the house allowed us to regain some kind of feeling of security. They could not know where we were. That would be impossible. They would surely not come to the house with the police here anyway. I waited for my girlfriend to pass out from exhaustion before I finally managed to fall asleep myself. I awoke several times throughout the night. It was not the cult that was haunting my dreams. It was that doll. The featureless face was more detailed with each passing nightmare. They all had the exact same theme, and it was almost an out-of-body experience. I was watching myself and my girlfriend sleeping from the far wall. I was glued to the spot, unable to move. The doll was at the end of the bed, with its back towards me in the first nightmare. I awoke suddenly, but quickly passed out again soon after, brushing it off. The next time, it had slowly began to turn its head. I awoke in a panic and searched around the room and under the bed. I knew I was being crazy, but I could not help it. I felt like something was watching me, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I finally fell asleep again a little while later. The next nightmare lasted a little bit longer. It had turned its head, and it was facing my direction. It had stitching where the eyes and mouth would be. The stitching was moving vigorously, as if something was attempting to break the stitching away. It would be as if you had duct tape on your mouth and eyes, and were desperately trying to remove it without access to your hands. This one unsettled me a little bit more than the others, but once again, I somehow managed to fall back to sleep. I was so tired at this point that I could not keep my eyes open, even if I wanted to. In the final nightmare, before I woke this morning, it had broken free from the stitching. It was looking directly at me. The stitching had been replaced with endless pools of darkness. I could sense the evil within the stare. I could feel the sweat dripping down from my forehead. I looked down, and the long arm at the side of the doll was gently caressing my girlfriend's leg as it looked towards me. It was all just a nightmare, but every time I close my eyes, I swear that I can see it. I think I must just be exhausted from this whole situation. I've barely slept over the past week, and I think everything is getting to me now. We are prisoners in this house. We cannot leave or contact anyone on the outside. This is my only means of communication with the outside world. I do not feel safe. I think that these people will do anything in their power to make sure she is theirs. I feel that they are just biding their time. There must be a reason why. I think that the number 21 must have something to do with all of this. We have been here for 3 days now. There have been no news reports or police statements. I have been vigorously checking online for any kind of update. The police officers have been deflecting all of my questions regarding the matter. They just keep reiterating to us that we are in the safest place possible. Part 4. We researched into the summer solstice, which happens on the 21st of June. It varies from year to year, but that is the date for 2017. It is an occult ritual that has been celebrated by a variety of groups. The pagans, among others, celebrate this date. It is when the sun is at the highest point that a human or animal will be sacrificed as an offering. I am not certain that this is what that number means, but it petrified me. It makes frighteningly logical sense at this point. We looked a little into other suggestions. It could be the amount of victims the cult has taken. I find this unlikely, though. With the aggression they are showing us, it would seem that something would have been reported before. That is unless they are becoming more desperate to complete the ritual. I should mention that there have been quite a few visitors since we have been here. I have not seen a uniformed officer in a few days, and the officers that are watching us seem to change frequently. I guess that's normal, as everyone needs downtime at some point. I also cannot see the patrol car that is meant to be watching the house. There are men outside, though, who are constantly watching the house. The officers seemed friendly, so I had not been too worried or inquisitive. I figured they have a job to do, and we should leave them to it. It felt nice to have some semblance of safety and security. A few hours ago, I awoke to commotion and shouting coming from downstairs. It was still dark outside. I glanced at my phone and saw that it was 11 p.m. I walked down the stairs and saw the two on-duty officers talking to a woman in the living room. The woman was an older woman, with an air of authority about her. It felt as if she was chastising the officers. They were louder before, but must have heard the stairs creak, as they were now speaking in hushed tones. I heard one of them whisper something about it not being the right time yet, as I got closer. I knocked on the door, even though it was open, to announce my presence. The talking abruptly ceased, and they all just sat there staring at one another. The two officers sat there like naughty children, not saying a word, and looking at the woman for assurance. The woman slowly lifted herself off of the chair and walked towards me with a wide grin stretched across her face. I was about to post my accounts of what has happened when my phone began to ring. It was a number that I did not have saved in my phone. I did not want to answer it and let it ring out. A voicemail notification popped up on the screen soon after. I opened it up and immediately heard a familiar voice on the other end. "Hi, Jason. This is Officer Henderson. Sorry to call you so late. We have just been to your parents' house to check on you, but all of the lights were off, and there are no cars. I guess you've got away from the madness for a little while. I hope that all is okay. Can you call me back when you get this, as we need you both to come down to the station to answer some more questions?" I staggered back, speechless. Why was he not aware that we had been moved in to protective custody? I heard loud noises coming from outside. I moved towards the window and peered out of the curtains. The woman was now shouting at the men outside. She was pointing at the house furiously. I quickly ducked down as she turned to face our window. I think she saw me. I slowly raised my head towards the window again, and the woman and the two men were staring directly at me. She sighed to herself before they all began walking towards the house. I ducked back down again out of view. I heard the front door slam shut soon after. I woke my girlfriend, and we moved everything we could move to block the door. I did not have time to explain, but she immediately knew something was wrong. I grabbed my phone and called the number back, but the line was busy. I tried again and again until I finally got through. Hello, is that Officer Henderson? I said, barely able to form a sentence. Hello, Jason. Sorry about the late-night call. I just got a little worried when no one was in. Is everything okay? We have been moved into protective custody. We have been here for 3 days, I said, my voice cracking with every word. We did not arrange that. That makes no sense. Where are you? Who took you there? He said. I could hear the panic in his voice. I do not know where we are. There are people all around the house. I think they know, I said, before he interrupted me. Keep your phone on. We will attempt to triangulate your location. We sat there in silence for another 20 minutes, until a gentle tapping on the bedroom door could be heard. I attempted to scream at them to leave us alone, but it came out as more of a soft whimper. I still had the phone to my ear and could hear Officer Henderson shouting down the radio to hurry up. I can hear something. What is happening? The local police are only a few minutes away. You need to lock yourself in a secure room. Hello? The banging on the door is becoming incessant. The woman was calmly asking us to open the door, but now she is manically screaming. I am not listening to her. They have no reason to keep me alive. They only need my girlfriend alive, and I have to protect her. The fear has overcome us, and we can do nothing but sit here motionlessly, staring at the door. I can only sit here in silence and wait for the police to arrive. I can only sit here in silence as my mother's agonizing screams for help pierce through me. I can only sit here in silence as the sound of my father's bones cracking resonates throughout the house, while he tearfully begs us not to open the door. I apologize for the delay, but I have not felt safe enough or had the energy to write up my final accounts. I now feel that I can explain what happened. I will continue from where I left off. Tried to stop it. I had begged and pleaded through the door for my parents' safety, but was met with contempt. The heinous sounds of laughing mixed with my parents' screams quickly overcome me. I began to remove the barricade from the door as rage and fear rushed through me. I had removed most of the barricade when I turned to my girlfriend. She had not spoken a word throughout all of this. She sat there, pale as a ghost, rocking back and forth. I stared at her, looking for any kind of guidance, but received none. I attempted to plead for my parents' lives over and over again, but I only received one response. They would make a trade, a like-for-like trade in a sense. They would allow my parents to live if I opened the door and handed my girlfriend over. I feel they could have broken the door down if they wanted to. I think they enjoyed me having to make a decision of this magnitude. I knew that if I opened the door, none of us would live. There was far too many of them for me to stand any chance of getting out alive. I am not a trained fighter and barely had any weapons at my disposal. I began to slowly place items back in front of the door as tears streamed down my cheeks. I was handing my parents a death sentence, the people who had raised me and always had me at the forefront of their mind. I was now about to turn my back on them. I sat back down and covered my ears to block out the misery and pain. The sounds of my mother and father soon dissipated as silence engulfed the house. The monotonous, constant cackling was all I could hear over the buzzing in my ears. The woman was mocking me. She wanted me to open the door. It took every single fiber of my being not to do so. After a little while, the sounds of the woman also disappeared. We were left in complete silence. Sirens soon filled the silence, and flashing lights lit up the house. The sound of the door being broken in was quickly followed by the police announcing themselves. Then the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer. This is the police. Plea? What the hell is that? We need backup. Immediately. Get down. Get down on the ground right now. Do not move. I sat there motionless, unable to face what was on the other side of the door. The door handle soon began to jolt up and down as the police asked us to open the door. I moved over to the door, unaware if this was just another ploy. It was at the point where it no longer mattered. I had lost all faith. I removed the barricade and opened the door. I fell to my knees as soon as I gazed upon the carnage that was ensuing outside of the room. The police officer just stared at us, after realizing we were the victims in all of this. He attempted to usher me back inside of the room, but I would not move. The police were in the process of detaining the men as they waited for backup to arrive. There were 8 police officers that had arrived at the scene, with what I assumed was the entire cult, sitting in a circle on the balcony. There was a noose hanging in the center of them, but no one was attached to it. The police were screaming at the men to get down on the floor, but the men were not listening. The moment I had exited the room, the men had all turned to face me in sync. They all had the same sinister smirk on their faces. They did not object or struggle when the police forced them to the ground. their stares remaining transfixed on me. The man who I had considered my best friend, the man who would have done absolutely anything to keep me safe, was laying motionless at the other side of the hallway. A police officer was desperately performing CPR to bring him back, but he remained there, lifeless. I searched around the room for my mother, but she was nowhere to be seen. I snapped out of my trance and frantically began to run towards my father. The police officer sorrowfully shook his head as I approached. I began pounding on my father's chest while sobbing uncontrollably, attempting to bring him back. It was worthless. He had passed long before the police had arrived. The police officer pulled me away to console me, and I gained some composure in an attempt to find my mother. Anger took over. I walked over to the men whose glances had followed me across to the other side of the room. I screamed at one of the men as I hit him over and over again, asking where my mother was. The police officers barely had control of the situation as it was. I continued to hit the man over and over, but he remained in silence, smirking at me as blood ran down his face. The other men did not attempt to help him, and he did not bother to defend himself. They all just continued to smile at me. A police officer finally pulled me away, but we both stumbled backwards. One of the men in the circle grabbed me and pulled me in close, whispering into my ear. He spoke like a child, in broken English. I am paraphrasing what he said to me. Mother could not take us all with her. It is for the best. Soon we will have another blessing, as will you. We will all have another brother soon. Mother is patient, but she never forgets. She never gives in. She will still get what she wants. A police officer eventually pushed him back to the floor, pushing me away as he did. I fell backwards onto the wall. I began to sob uncontrollably, begging and pleading for them to tell me where my mother had been taken. The rest of the police force soon arrived, amongst them Officer Henderson. They removed the men from upstairs and brought them down into the police vans, as I sat next to my father, aimlessly stroking his hair, begging for him to return to me. We were escorted out of there soon after, as the police searched the remainder of the house and grounds. Officer Henderson was silent as he drove us over to my girlfriend's parents. I think he took some of the blame in all of this. The police constantly monitored the premises while we remained there. We did not stay there for more than a few days, as we did not want to put anyone else in danger. We were given new identities and moved to a completely different part of the UK. We have been here for a while now, and this will be my last account. We have removed ourselves from social media and made sure to never broadcast our location. The men that were arrested at the house were relatively young men. They had no identities and absolutely no records. They were ghosts. The men that were posing as police officers inside of the house and the officers that originally took us to the house have not been caught. The woman, who I now assume is behind a lot of this, has also not been caught. Officer Henderson did not mention much else about the case to us. He has updated us periodically, but has definitely held certain details back. I think he feels that we are as safe as we can be for now. My mother has not been found, and I am not sure that she ever will be. The only thing that he did tell me was that the men that were caught were of varying ages, and all had the intelligence of young children. They have not stopped crying for their mother. They have not been able to answer any questions, and he is not sure if they even know what they have done. He assumes that the mother was the woman that visited us on the final night. He also believes that this cult is not just local. He does not know how far this stretches. Things will never be the same now. We fear leaving the house or contacting friends and relatives. I am not sure if we will ever feel safe again. No one can protect us forever. I blame myself completely for the death of my father. If we had not involved him, if we had just gone somewhere else, if we had made different decisions, maybe he would still be alive. I believe my mother is still alive. I believe she will be alive until they no longer need her. I hope that one day she will be found alive and well, but as the days and weeks pass by, it seems more and more unlikely. There is a small part of me that hopes that she was sacrificed. It's better than the alternative. I cannot fathom the strength it would take to survive for 9 months with these people. I know that they will find us again. I know that we cannot run forever. They may already be aware of our location. I have no idea how many people are involved in this cult. I have no idea how much longer we can run and hide. I want it all to end. I do know, however, that we are not the only ones at risk. We are not special. This final account is to serve as a warning. If you feel like you are being watched, if you see anyone out of the ordinary, if you receive anything out of the ordinary, or if you come into contact with these people, do not brush it off. Do not stay in one place. Do not trust anyone. This cult is extremely dangerous. Once they latch onto you, they will never give in. I pray that none of you are their next victims. The Wheelbarrow Cult. My mother left us when I was 6 years old. She'd been having an affair with a co-worker, and it turned into a relationship. My dad got full custody of me, and this huge part of our lives just disappeared, seemingly overnight. A year later, my mother had moved to Sarasota and was about to have her second kid, what would be my half-brother, Charles. My father never really recovered. He tried to get back out there, but some levels of trust just can't be regained. Still, time passes. 2 halves of a family repaired themselves, and even though my relationship with my mother never quite recovered, we kept in touch. A periphery touch, but still. If something were to happen, I got to hear about it. And then there was Charles, my half-brother. I didn't know him, and everything about his very existence had always been painted in sort of a black cloud. I hated him not for who he was, but for what he was, an expression of the most turbulent time in my youth. I hated him. I couldn't help it, and I knew nothing of him, but I hated him nonetheless. I didn't pay much attention to Charles and his antics. He was just this person somewhere off in the distance, living his own life. I saw the occasional high school photo, or him recommending something off his Spotify playlist. He was just some guy. I wasn't there to celebrate any of the big birthdays, and he didn't celebrate any of mine. Charles turned 21 in 2017. I saw some pictures of a big party, and there was an open-ended invitation for anyone to come join. I'm sure I'd have been allowed to, if I wanted. But that was never really on the agenda. It wasn't even discussed. I had my own life at that point, and patching that bridge seemed useless, like trying to fix something that you've worked your whole life to get around. What's the point in fixing a bridge when you're an Olympic swimmer? Something like that. But there were things happening behind the scenes that I didn't know of until much later. For example, Charles had been having anxiety issues since middle school. He was riddled with phobias and panic attacks. He'd been having trouble keeping up in school, and most of his friends were, at best, superficial. The kind of people who turn their back on you when the going gets tough. I had no idea about any of that, but I was about to get a lot more involved in his life than I'd ever asked for. It was late July in 2018. I was coming home from a long shift and had stopped to get some groceries when my phone went off. I loaded in the last paper bag, gave my girlfriend an apologetic look, and took the call. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken directly to her for decades. "Hey, Blue Jay," she sighed. "I'm sorry it's been so long." My first reaction was anger. How dare she call me that still? It turned my stomach sour, like I'd swallowed something smoldering. I managed to keep things polite, biting my lip. "Everything all right?" She had to be calling for a reason. She wanted something. She'd never talk to me without a reason. "It's about your brother," she said. "I don't know what to do. I don't have a brother. But you do," she sighed. "You do, and I think he needs you." She explained the situation as best she could. As a way to deal with his issues, Charles had been seeking advice and guidance from people outside of his usual social circles. Harmless stuff at first, spiritual guides and faith healers. He'd studied Buddhism and Hinduism to broaden his horizons, and he'd been trying everything from yoga to revival gatherings. But lately, things had taken a turn. "It's just been one thing after another," my mum explained, "and now he's gone all quiet. Isn't that a good thing? Charles tells me everything," she sighed. "This isn't like him. I can't get a hold of him. So just call the police. He's an adult now. There was a short break. She composed herself, clearly upset. My callous tone wasn't helping. "I think he's with some bad people." She reached out to me, figuring I'd be someone far enough in the periphery to go under the radar. Someone they wouldn't question too much. Everyone else in Charles' life seemed to be blacklisted and turned away at the door, but perhaps an unknown half-brother might slip by. That's what she argued anyway. "I know I can't ask you to help," she said, "but I think it could do us some good. All of us. Family is important to you, huh?" Again, silence. I just shook my head. I'd opened the car door and sat down. My girlfriend could tell I was upset and was leaning over to hug me. I hadn't even noticed how hard I was digging my fingers into the dashboard until I saw them turning pale. "You don't have to believe me," Mum said, "but it is. It really is." And with that, I hung up. I argued with myself back and forth for days. Charles had never done anything to hurt me, but I couldn't help but to hate him. But it was difficult to say whether that hate was more important than that sinking feeling I had in my stomach. Even then, even at my lowest, angriest point, I couldn't bring myself to want to hurt my mother. I couldn't. So I decided to help. All other things be damned. At the very least, I could show her I'd turned into a good man, all without her help. I texted her to get me all the info she could, and I booked a flight over the following week. I made my way to Florida. I'd been getting tons of emails with all kinds of images, descriptions and video, but I hadn't taken the time to sit down and review it all. I had a rough idea. According to my mum, it had started with a nightmare. She told me that Charles kept having nightmares about a boy in blue. He'd call her late at night, rambling about it in a half-woken stupor. These nightmares would control his life, and he would try to find subtle ways of dealing with it. To an outsider, it just seemed like much of his other anxieties, a fixed idea that he couldn't rid himself of. There were pictures of his apartment. He'd removed the curtains from the windows to make sure the boy in blue could spot him, if need be. Later, he would just opt to sleep out in the open. Something about the clear blue sky being a relaxing factor. And there were other little things. He started to wear more formal shirts. He cut his hair. He started growing strange flowers in his front yard. And then, radio silence. Gone. First thing I did was to check his apartment. Just like my mum had said, there were no curtains. I could see straight in, and it was easy to tell it hadn't been used for quite some time. I got the impression that something had happened there. It was just too barren. A 20-something-year-old with an interest in religion and philosophy, and not a single piece of memorabilia, no books, nothing. The place was a ghost town. Hell, at least the sunflowers he'd planted were doing well. Not a fan of the blue color, though. Those things didn't look natural. The final straw was seeing the pile of mail by the front door. It was substantial. We were talking a couple of months at least. Reminders on reminders. Then There was the core of the issue, the group he'd been involved in, the Church of the 12th Sky Assembly. They had a bit of a social media presence, but they didn't have much to say. They seemed like your average run-of-the-mill group, with smiling young people offering companionship and understanding in their outreach material. It was so general that I felt like I'd seen it before. I had a bit of luck, though. Turns out they had a community event going on later that day. I figured it was a good way to get my foot in the door. Probably wasn't the best idea to just go knocking on their compound. From what I could find, they had a place out by Lake Parish, but it seemed to be a members-only kind of deal. Not much said about it on their socials. So I drove out to Bradenton Beach, hoping to spot these nutjobs in action. Turns out, it wasn't as difficult as I'd imagined. They'd made themselves a bit of a stand down by the beach, where they were handing out flyers. Looking at it from a distance, you might mistake it for an energy drink promo. About a dozen beach-fit young people, eagerly engaging in conversation. It seemed so disingenuous. Still, I gave it a shot. I put my sandals on and took a casual stroll, pretending to be passing by. It didn't take long for a young man and woman to come up to me, their smiles as white as the flyers they were handing out. "Excuse me," they smiled. "Having a nice day?" "Can't complain," I smiled right back. "You folks out here selling something?" "Nah," they chuckled, "just sharing the good vibes." And with that, I had a pamphlet in my hand. I stuck around to talk to them for a bit. As a whole, the organization didn't look that strange, but once you started singling out individual pieces, you could see some inconsistencies. For example, their logo. For a church called the 12th Sky Assembly, one might imagine clouds or a cross. But no, their logo was a wheelbarrow, one of those old-timey wooden ones. I counted the pegs on the wheel, but it just added up to 7. It wasn't even numerically consistent. Then there were the members themselves. I got the impression that this wasn't an actual passion of theirs. They seemed disconnected, and their lines seemed practiced, like they weren't really members of the church, but just paid to be there. The way they talked, when they didn't think anyone was listening, sort of confirmed this. This was all an act. But for what? "Are you the folks out by up by Lake Parish?" I asked. "I think I've seen that logo before." "That's just administrative. We're in 7 different cities across the state, so it takes a whole lot of effort from a whole lot of people to keep things running." They immediately got defensive. I tried to shift away from the compound, instead talking about meetings and other members, but they'd already soured. It wasn't until one of the folks in the background approached that I felt like I was getting somewhere. He was a man in his early 50s, with short blonde hair and a sizable gut. Large black glasses, a white shirt, and a blue tie. He patted the others on the shoulder and smiled at me. "You consider yourself a man of many questions, friend?" he asked. "I suppose I am. Not a lot of places to ask them nowadays." "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for." And with that, he turned his back on me. I must have said something to spook them. I had no choice but to go all in. "The boy in blue," I said. It was the first thing that came to mind. It had been the central theme in Charles's issues. It had to mean something. The man turned around, adjusted his glasses, and squinted at me. "The boy in blue, huh?" "Yeah," I nodded. "It's been keeping me up at night." "I can imagine." He put his hand on my shoulder and took a deep breath. Finally, his eyes met mine. This time, his smile was genuine. Perhaps we got a few things to talk about after all. I spent the better part of the day talking to that man. His name was Isaiah, and he was one of the aspiring members of the church. He'd been with them for a couple of months and was still getting his bearings. Still, what I'd said resonated with him. The boy in blue was a common theme among the church's inner circle. They said it was a prophetic vision, a guideline for things to come. Later in the afternoon, as we were calling it a day, Isaiah and I circled back to the tent they'd set up down at the beach. I almost stumbled over one of the wheelbarrows they had there, and I couldn't help but to ask about it. It's an unusual symbol, I'll freely admit to that, Isaiah chuckled. But it's about picking yourself up, about extending yourself beyond your usual capabilities. That's a lot to ask from a wheelbarrow. We don't ask anything from the wheelbarrow, he smiled. It's about you. You're the one who has to pick it up, but it's there when you need it. Having a foot in the door, I settled into a temporary routine. I called my girlfriend every night, keeping her updated on what was going on. I sent a text to my mom every now and then too, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. I would spend my afternoon messaging Isaiah and trying to keep a low profile, waiting for an invitation to something further. If I could just get a chance to meet the other members, there'd be a chance of me meeting up with Charles. And maybe I wouldn't be able to get him out of there, but at least I could make sure he was okay. I met Isaiah a couple of times over the following week, once for lunch and another time at a separate event. I was invited to help, and I accepted. I mostly printed pamphlets and helped setting up their tent. The pamphlet wasn't that interesting. The logo, an address for an office downtown, and an inspirational quote about reaching for the sky. Not much more than that. I got the impression that handing them out was mostly a way to get an excuse to talk to people, rather than to share a message, almost as if it was expected for them to do this. The more I spent time with Isaiah, I got the impression that this wasn't just a church. There were no priests or preachers, and there were no spectacular meetings. If anything, they were just going through the motions. Everything pointed to the compound by Lake Parish. There had to be something there, and Isaiah was my way in. I had to try something big. The third time I met him, I hadn't showered for 3 days. I pretended to have slept in my car, and I made up a lie about going through a rough breakup. Isaiah was a bit surprised, but bounced back as the gears in the back of his mind clicked into place. "Sorry to hear that," he said. "You made a beautiful couple." It was an innocent enough sentiment, but there was an uncomfortable reveal hidden in it. He knew what my girlfriend looked like. I'd never shown him a picture. Had they been looking me up? "I guess that's why you're out here." "Huh? Starting over?" "I'm just in a bad place," I said. "I barely get enough sleep as is." "No, I hear you," he nodded. "I've been there. But it's like, sometimes the cure is worse than the disease, you know." Him saying that stood out to me. This wasn't a man trying to trick me into a cult. This was a man trying to keep me out. It was a warning, not an invitation. "Anything is better than this," I sighed. Isaiah looked me in the eye, clearly concerned. He tapped a nearby wheelbarrow. "All right then." We drove out to Lake Parish later that day. It was a silent trip with Isaiah behind the wheel. No radio, no small talk. If anything, he seemed apologetic, like he didn't want me to do this. Following a side road, we passed a sign that reminded us that we were entering private property. Not long after, we reached a chain-linked fence. Isaiah had a key for the padlock. The compound was not what I expected. A trio of one-story buildings out in a field, covered from end to end by the fences and trees. The knee-length grass that covered the area made the place look abandoned. A handful of people in white shirts moved between the buildings, pointing at one another and having lively discussions. "So what can I expect?" I asked. "Do all people here have the same problem?" "Yeah," Isaiah nodded, "but not all are willing to deal with it." He looked up at me, but not in the eye. He wasn't sure about this. "Talk to Miss Miller," he continued, "and go from there." I got some time to just walk around the compound, looking for Charles. There was a central area between the three buildings that looked like a sort of gathering spot. The ground was flattened and the grass cut, with 6 wheelbarrows off to the side. I don't know why, but I felt this unease looking at them. They all had these dark splotches at the end. There were probably about a dozen people there at the time. Isaiah took the car and left, leaving me to speak with this Miller woman on my own. She had an office on the west end of the front building, almost like a reception. I couldn't get over how sparsely decorated the place was. A logo every now and then, the occasional wheelbarrow, and that was it. The place was pretty much sterile. It even smelled like a hospital. Miss Miller was an older woman with short grey hair and thick glasses. She asked me to come in and sit down across from her and fill out a form. I was asked to surrender my phone, keys, and wallet. The form asked for all kinds of personal info, including password and username for various social media accounts. But what surprised me the most was the second page, which was all about my proposed anxiety issues. There were 3 spaces for paragraphs where I was supposed to describe my meetings with the boy in blue. I just made something up, trying to keep the small talk up. Miller didn't have much to say. She assured me that there was help to get, but that they needed complete honesty from me. I tried to ask her a bit about the other members, which she called patients, and how they were dealing with it, to which she had this to say. "What you're experiencing is no fault of your own," she said. "It is not by the will of a god or Satan or anything in between. It is beyond our measure, and so the steps to stop it may seem drastic." I had to go through a quick physical checkup. I had to fill out a health form, and they tested my blood. There was a surprising amount of people on hand who seemed to have a medical background. Some seemed to have a corporate background. I noticed a lot of boxes with a particular pharmaceutical company. Looked like a sort of axe or hatchet. When all things looked to be in order, I was guided to a personal room at the far end of the compound. A long corridor with locked doors, from which I could hear groaning and crying. A nurse rushed past me with an armful of bloody linens. Miss Miller showed me to a private room. Not much to it. A bathroom, a bed, an end table. No windows, and the door locked from outside. The latter I didn't notice until the door clicked close. I probably spent the better part of a day locked in that room. I could hear people in the other rooms. Most of them weren't saying anything coherent. Some were crying, others just screamed. Someone tried to keep their composure and politely ask for help, all coming from muffled voices from behind locked doors. Now, I don't have a way to check, but I think it took about 12 hours or so in total. I'd arrived early in the morning, and by the time the door opened, it was getting dark outside. My first thought was to get the hell out of there, but I was in too deep. I'd invested too much, and I just had to finish it. If Charles was stuck in this place, it was time to get him out. When one of the nurses let me out, I was handed a wicker basket with various hygiene articles and some fresh clothes. Washed and cleaned, I was put in a line with other people, some who looked worse for wear, others who didn't seem to know what was going on. There was this one woman who could barely stand up and had to lean on one of the nurse attendants. Looking at them, it was easy to forget that this was supposed to be a religious organization. It looked more like a hospital. We were taken out into the middle of the compound. There were about a dozen attendants and 9 other people like me who'd been taken out there. They turned on a series of floodlights, bathing the yard in pale white. That's when I saw Charles. He must have lost at least 30 pounds. The guy was skin and bones. His hair had fallen out, and he had this patchy, unshaved mess on his face. He looked completely out of it. I couldn't imagine him recognizing me, even in a healthy state. But now that I'd seen him, I was glad I was there. I was going to help him, one way or another. I just had to get through whatever this was supposed to be. We all lined up in a circle, each with a wheelbarrow in front of us. Everyone else lifted them up by the handles, and one by one, they were administered a pill. People just took them, no questions asked. I could hear a single protest, someone not being sure. They were simply asked if they wanted help or not. They did, and down the pill went. When it was my turn, I just shook my head. "No, thank you." "Then we're going to have to ask you to leave," said the nurse. I looked around the circle. I was holding up the line. There was no ifs, ands, or buts here. If you wanted their help, you took the pill. So I did. It was a sort of muscle relaxant. It wasn't a powerful hallucinogen or anything like that. Just something that made my shoulders slump and my speech slur. But looking around the circle, it seemed to have a massive effect on the others. The nurses went patient by patient and recorded what they were saying, making notes on a spreadsheet when there was something of particular interest. Most folks were just rambling incoherently, but a few of them were strangely lucid. Some were naming places or things, vague descriptions of events unfolding. A few of the nurses were asking targeted questions or even making demands. "Ask him to show you the Portuguese election," one nurse said. "Are you getting anything?" I was asked to share my experiences too. I just copied a bit from what I heard others saying. I could tell they weren't entirely convinced. They went out of their way to get a light to shine in my face, but before they got a chance to, one of the guys next to me started freaking out. He was in his early 40s, didn't look all that peculiar. Pretty fit, somewhat shorter than usual, balding, reading glasses with a crooked frame. His knuckles had gone white, and he started shaking his wheelbarrow. His eyes rolled back in his skull. "A fire!" he screamed. "I see a fire!" The nurses flocked to him. He's showing me a fire." Screams. A highway cut off it by fallen trees. Late autumn. November. Crackling bark, turning black. "Look for a license plate," one of the nurses said. "Can you see a license plate?" "Oh, Ontario?" One of them ran off, speaking loudly into a phone. Others stepped back. They all looked at the man with anticipation. He releases me," the man said. I'm released." And with that, there was a sudden quiet. The nurses looked away, as if bracing themselves. I didn't look away, but I wish I had. His voice became more distant as his jaw extended. His tongue was swelling. So was his abdomen. Seconds later, there was a loud pop. Blood and viscera exploded out of his stomach, filling the wheelbarrow. Then another pop, as his tongue did the same. Then he just stood there, bleeding out, frozen, holding that wheelbarrow, a tool to keep him from staining the ground. No one reacted. No one recoiled, or ran, or screamed. It was just this eerie quiet. I could feel panic boiling in my chest, but I tried not to stick out. There was no telling what they'd do if they thought I was faking it. About half a minute later, it happened to another one. The nurses called out to one another, confirming what they'd heard. Fire. Ontario. Late November. They were cross-examining information and details given by these people. Every bone in my body was telling me to run, to just beeline to Charles, get him, and head for the exit. But looking at the dead man to my left, still standing, holding his wheelbarrow, there was a primal part of me that refused to move. I felt like an antelope watching a lion pass me by. A twitch of the leg might set it off. I had to wait. They were poking and prodding at the others, asking them questions. 4 people in total seemed to have something to share, and the same 4 people popped like overly ripe berries. Their faces had this look of relief on them, like this was a kind of reward. This was what they aspired to get. The thought struck me that perhaps this was what awaited Charles as well. I looked at him as his head started to swivel back and forth. His eyes were rolling back. I couldn't wait. I took my first steps towards him. No one noticed at first, but as I gained speed, others called out. They asked me to stop, to wait, to listen. But as I saw Charles's hands tighten around the grip of the wheelbarrow and his voice rising in cadence, I didn't consider the consequences. I had to try something, anything. So I tackled him, and the moment I put my hands on him, something inside me broke. I looked into his face as the world shifted. I was standing on a highway among dozens of broken-down cars, burning trees falling all around us to the screams of hundreds. Charles was there. We were running in the wrong direction, watching people choke to death inside their cars. Others just walked into the woods, falling over from asphyxiation. Further down the road, a child, a boy, no older than 7 or 8, dressed in blue. That's who we were heading for. Charles looked back at me. "He's showing us," he said. "We have to keep—" I grabbed him. I slammed him to the ground. I could feel the texture of the asphalt on my hands. I could taste the burning oak trees. But it wasn't real, and it couldn't be. In the blink of an eye, we were on a plane, falling through the sky. Oxygen masks long since deployed, people screaming as alarms blared. Again, just down the aisle, a little boy in blue, waiting for us to come closer, wanting to show us more. "He's trying to save us," Charles cried. "He needs me to—" "No!" Another blink of the eye, standing on a beach, watching a cruise ship slowly capsize. I forced myself to look away, to not see the name of it. I grabbed Charles by the face, forcing his eyes to lock onto mine. Blink after blink after blink. Earthquakes, shootings, fires, lightning strikes, hurricanes, floods, bursting dams, falling bridges, knives and guns, hangings to cheering crowds. Death, death, death. Then, for a brief moment, grass. Back in that field, in that compound. People were coming for us. Charles was next to me, clutching his stomach. I leaned over, grabbed him under the arms, and lifted him to his feet. If I was going to have to drag him out, I would. Blink. A congregation standing in a massive cathedral as the ceiling caves in. Idols and Latin hymns crumbling. Dark shades in the distance growing closer. Then back again, screaming all around me. Another patient has burst on the other side of the field, filling another wheelbarrow. Blink, blink, blink. Soon, the screaming was getting harder to tell apart. Some of it coming from the nurses, others coming from the patients, others still coming from God knows where. It was all getting mixed up. Still, I carried Charles step by step, out towards the front fences, trying my best not to have him look at anything for too long. His stomach was moving, literally, physically moving. His eyes were rolling back and forth. His tongue swelled to the point where words turned to noises. I had to get him away from this, to distract him. Something. I closed my eyes. Then, for a brief moment, grass. Back in that field, in that compound. People were coming for us. Charles was next to me, clutching his stomach. I leaned over, grabbed him under the arms, and lifted him to his feet. If I was going to have to drag him out, I would. Blink. A congregation standing in a massive cathedral as the ceiling caves in. Idols and Latin hymns crumbling. Dark shades in the distance growing closer. Then back again, screaming all around me. Another patient has burst on the other side of the field, filling another wheelbarrow. Blink, blink, blink. Soon, the screaming was getting harder to tell apart. Some of it coming from the nurses, others coming from the patients, others still coming from God knows where. It was all getting mixed up. Still, I carried Charles step by step, out towards the front fences, trying my best not to have him look at anything for too long. His stomach was moving, literally, physically moving. His eyes were rolling back and forth. His tongue swelled to the point where words turned to noises. I had to get him away from this, to distract him. Something. I closed my eyes. A wave of hot air, stinking of sulfur. An endless highway. Waves of red sand blasting us from all sides, blistering our skin. Rattling bones litter the side of the road, bearing witness to countless people who've fallen. Off in the distance, a boy in blue, urging me to look closer, to get sucked in, just like the rest of them. I cover my eyes, as well as Charles. "You need to know," a voice whispers right next to my ear. "You need to see." Something is pressed into my hand. I protest. I scream. I feel the sand burrowing into my skin. Suddenly, I am sitting down. A soft wind, the click of a seatbelt, then sudden acceleration. I thought it another vision, but it lasted too long. Hold on. A gate crashing open. I was in the back seat of a car, with Charles next to me. He was doubled over, crying hysterically. In the front seat was Isaiah, stepping on the gas. "I'm sorry," he gasped, as he turned the car around, heading for the highway. "This is the only way to stop it. It's the only way it ends." And with that, we sped into the night. By morning, Charles was getting better. His stomach wasn't moving anymore, and his tongue wasn't swelling. His eyes were red, but he could focus again. He was barely speaking, but visibly conscious. He responded to questions, albeit Isaiah confided in me that he'd been plagued by the same visions as Charles for some time, but couldn't bring himself to go all the way. He'd seen the end goal, and how the nurses poked and prodded for people to extend themselves. "That's not the way I want to go," he sighed. "No matter what, that's not it." He shared a cigarette with me. I hadn't smoked since high school. "I saw what you were trying to do," he admitted. "You were making the same choice that I'd had, except you were showing it. You know? You were doing something. I've just been coasting along." Isaiah told me all he knew, that the church was sponsored by some kind of pharmaceutical company, that the religious front was basically a way to identify legitimate targets and bring them in, to turn them into this sort of commodity, a wheelbarrow man, someone who could share something about things to come for a company to exploit. "They're not telling you the whole story," Isaiah continued. "They don't tell you that it passes, that it comes and goes in waves, leaping from one person to another, and that if you just refuse to listen hard enough, it will leave you alone. So they offer a fast and easy way, at the cost of your life." "Yeah," Isaiah nodded. "Story as old as time." He looked down at his cigarette with a sigh, flicking it away. Charles was slowly recovering. He could barely speak, and we had to help him in and out of the car, but he made it back home. I thought I'd be angry seeing my mum again, but there was no way to get angry at a smile that honest. Her sense of relief was infectious. And that time, when she hugged me and called me her blue jay, I couldn't help but to feel like she meant it. That one time, at the very least. And that was that. I've kept in touch with them over the years. Charles was in and out of therapy, slowly recovering from his painful visions. He got back on his feet about the time when the COVID pandemic hit. Isaiah got completely out of the Church of the 12th Sky Assembly, instead getting involved in local politics in his home state of Indiana. I think he works some kind of local campaign there. I'd like to say I've grown closer with my mother's side of the family, but that's not really how the world works. This was an anomaly, in many senses of the word. I'm sure they are thankful, but apart from the occasional greeting or birthday card, things are as they always have been. So in a way, things are as they always have been. And in another very real sense, nothing is. See, something was pressed into my hand that night. I haven't told anyone about it, and I probably never will. A note with names, dates, and events. I don't want to think about it too much, or I might fall victim to the same thing that Charles did. Even talking about it now brings this sinking feeling into the pit of my stomach. Still, I can't deny that I can recognize some of these names in the news, and it's making me nervous. But it raises an important question. Would the knowledge we could gain from this be worth a life? Could it save others? Is it even real? The fire referenced that night never happened, as far as I know. But if they hadn't spoken about it, could it have happened? I think the only way to get a clear answer is to look a bit closer and put it all on the line. I investigate cults by living amongst them, but I think I've taken things too far this time. My morbid fascination for cults began long ago when I was a young man, hearing about a terrible incident in which a great many people died. Now, I naturally felt immense sympathy for the corrupted minds and souls lost that day, but something in me yearned to understand the psychological aspect of it all better. The years went by, and my interest only grew with the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. Eventually, though, I found my calling. I decided I wanted to quietly investigate cult psychology by embedding myself within them. Or, as any normal person would say, I joined a bunch of cults. It started small, religious kind of stuff. Groups similar to Scientology. These were a good starting point because their collective basis was somewhat still grounded in reality. Not that I was ever the spiritual type, but I could see the appeal, even if to someone like myself, the ideas posited remained completely ridiculous. Through the years, hopping from religious cult to religious cult, I learned a great deal about why people gave everything they had up to join these groups. Now, you might have already guessed the answer, but seeing it and being able to walk into a room of devotees and feel its thick, choking presence in the air made it so much more real. Fear. Naturally, I was forced to partake in their activities, to eat their food, to drink their drink. I had to become them, or else I'd be discovered. With the comparatively gentle nature of the earlier cults I joined, this wasn't much of an issue, but the constant sense of obsessive duty began to take its toll on me as the intensity rose. From reality-grounded religious cults, I moved on to animal sacrifice cults, and then on to UFO cults, before ending up here. One beyond simple description. After a run-of-the-mill pre-joining research period, I found myself stumbling through thick brush and leaves to attend my initiation deep within the woods at the edge of town. Usually, I had to travel pretty extensively to join a new cult, but this one was based close enough that it'd be far more convenient than the other options I had lined up. The thought of having my own bed to go back to every once in a while, rather than living in their commune, indefinitely sounded nice too. Eventually I came across a group of young-looking men and women standing in a large circle with interconnected hands. A stone was seemingly suspended in the air just above a raging campfire, and a man stood next to it with his back to me. Without turning, he spoke. "I see our latest brother has arrived. Welcome to our blessed commune." Thank you. My name is..." "No names," he retorted midway through my sentence. "Well, okay. I'm glad to be here. What would you like me to do?" I was familiar with initiations, and the audience surrounding me suggested it'd be more of the same. Taking an oath, reading some words from a scroll, repeating a phrase from a long-forgotten language. That kind of thing. The man still stood with his back to me and commanded me to walk closer to him, closer to the stone above the campfire. As I walked, the carvings on the stone became clearer to me. It was a face, and not one that was human either. "Take this dagger and draw blood." Ooh, I'd never been asked to give blood to whatever idea I'd be pretending to worship before. I felt like I was in a bad horror movie, and I loved it. The sharp tip of the blade he handed me behind his back pierced the skin across my palm, and I grimaced before he finally turned to me. He was as young as the others in the circle around me, and yet the look in his eyes was one of a weathered man, someone who'd seen a lot, done a lot. "Provide the stone with your offering," he spoke, whilst his eyes obsessively followed mine. Crimson red blood dripped down into the crevices of the carving before me, and eventually onto the fire. My train of thought was interrupted by the cult members around me, breaking into a collective hymn. I tried to make out what they were saying, but it was all unintelligible. Part of me thought it must have been the language of whatever entity they were worshipping, but it didn't sound like any language at all. Then they began to walk away, backwards, creating more distance between me and them, yet never breaking eye contact. The chanting grew louder and louder, and the structure of the circle remained as it had been, the leader traveling in the middle, along with the suddenly mobile fire and stone. Part of me wanted to follow, but another, more instinctual part, screamed at me to accept their departure. I shouted out, though, in an effort to understand what they were doing, where they were going. It yielded no results, and before long I was standing amongst the tall trees and whistling wind, completely alone. "Provide the stone with your offering," he spoke, whilst his eyes obsessively followed mine. Crimson red blood dripped down into the crevices of the carving before me, and eventually onto the fire. My train of thought was interrupted by the cult members around me, breaking into a collective hymn. I tried to make out what they were saying, but it was all unintelligible. Part of me thought it must have been the language of whatever entity they were worshipping, but it didn't sound like any language at all. Then they began to walk away, backwards, creating more distance between me and them, yet never breaking eye contact. The chanting grew louder and louder, and the structure of the circle remained as it had been, the leader traveling in the middle, along with the suddenly mobile fire and stone. Part of me wanted to follow, but another, more instinctual part, screamed at me to accept their departure. I shouted out, though, in an effort to understand what they were doing, where they were going. It yielded no results, and before long I was standing amongst the tall trees and whistling wind, completely alone. Thankfully, I managed to make my way home from those woods. I've come to find out that I brought something horrible along with me. I spent the next few days trying to find out anything beyond what my initial research into the hometown cult, as I've come to refer to it, revealed. With no contact from the people in the woods, I was left to my own devices and scoured the internet for anything that might have helped. Eventually, I came across something, not much, but something. A newspaper archive from 127 years ago, detailing the mass disappearance of every 35-year-old in the town. Supposedly, there had been 37 of them all those years ago, and the townsfolk woke up on the morning of June 27th to find they were all missing. Children walked into the bedrooms of their parents to find sheets strewn on the floor, and weary husbands awoke to their sleeping wives, no longer by their sides. Rumor at the time had it that their personal effects were found in a circle deep within the woods at the edge of town, just like the circle I'd seen. I tried to glean some context into the investigation and what happened next from later editions of the paper, but had no luck. It was as if there was a single mention of the incident, and then it too disappeared. Within a few days, and without much progress beyond the newspaper I'd found, my mind drifted away from the topic, and I found myself looking forward to a little break from my cult investigating facilities. My ignorant bliss didn't last long enough, though, unfortunately. Before long, a sense of duty began to envelop me, call out to me. I began to hear the hymn of the circle and the blood-soaked face of the stone entity in the dreams. Its face became engraved onto my mind, and it would just be there, present, always. I'd never been a person with a troubled mind, even given my escapades into mass psychological delusions. But the hymn grew louder, clearer. It wasn't incomprehensible any longer, and the things it was telling me were terrifying. The fear enveloped my every waking moment and my every dreaming moment. Perhaps I should have known my little hobby would someday move beyond delusions of salvation, move into real-life pain, torment. It wanted me to hurt myself, to give my life away as I'd pledged. What the fuck? I thought before finally realizing my little blood offering was far beyond the realm of simple initiation. I'd stumbled across my first human sacrificial cult. The hymns drown out the outside world now. They command me, and I obey. Part of me remains afraid, but fear can be drowned out too. Yesterday, the hymns chanted something nice to me for the first time. Happy birthday to you. 35 was always going to be a big year for me. Thank you for watching these terrifying stories until the end. Remember that we already have the next stories prepared for you. All you have to do is click on the next video that is displayed especially for you.